All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. So, inshallah, today we're going to be continuing with Tafseer Surah Al-Araf. Really excited to do Surah Al-Araf, like always. And let's see what we talked about before, or that is basically yesterday. And we were talking about the part about Prophet Saleh. And let's see some of the things that we went over. وأخذ الذين ظلموا الصيحة وعتوا عن أمر ربهم. And we talked about عقر الناقة. So let's go over it really quick. We said عقروا الناقة basically means they amputated the she-camel, and we went over that piece of it. إذ انبعث أشقاها, when the worst of them, and we talked about the psychology of these arrogant and narcissist figures that basically live in bullying others. And we said that those bullies, they basically come with a complete elimination of the consequence of their behavior. And they would think that they are basically in power. They get carried away with their power, get carried away with the privileges that they have, and they don't think about the consequences of their behavior. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know about these types of bullies and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to let it come back to them, and certainly get into giving them the consequence of their behavior, even when they thought that they would get away with it. And we also talked about some of the stories slash legends, okay, that were mentioned about who really are these people. Was it a queen that somehow told the people to go and kill or amputate the she-camel? We said we don't actually have evidence to support that, but it was just mentioned in, perhaps maybe they got it some legends, they got it from maybe other resources, but we do not necessarily have any authentic referencing to give us at least any way to verify this information. So since we're not able to verify this information, certainly we're just finding it in the book عرائس المجالس with the Thalibi, but that's not necessarily a resource that we can trust, especially if we did not have any chain of narration to give me any verification on this information. Okay, let's see. We also talked about this il-utu. We talked about the psychology of al-utu, of the psychology of arrogance, and we went into some details with that. So you can listen to that lecture that we talked about. We also talked about فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ. We talked about the difference between فَأَخَذَتْهُم or ثُمَّ أَخَذَتْهُم and وَأَخَذَتْهُم. And we said if we say the word ثُمَّ, that actually means that there was a time lapse. But if you say فَأَخَذَتْهُم, that means that there was no time lapse and it was an immediate consequence that they basically faced. وَأَخَذَتْهُم, it doesn't necessarily give me a time lapse per se, but it would tell me that in addition to that, or it can tell me that and it also, let's call it about a series, that it also led to such a consequence if we were to say وَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ. And we said that in other ayat, so there's the ayah that is telling us that their consequence, or at least their punishment, was a rajfa. In another ayah, it was telling us that it was a sayha. And we said the rajfa is to tell us about something like a natural disaster. Natural disaster, we're talking about a rajfa to mean a big shake, to mean some kind of an effect that happened, whether underneath them, or whether we're speaking about something that caused this area that they were living in to shake, which is, why did we use the word shake? Because a rajfa actually means that something is shaken. So what was shaken? Well, certainly they were very fond of these buildings that they had made by carving mountains and by carving big stones. So the ayah would let us know that what they were very proud of and what they were very fond of was basically that strength and certainly that power that they had in carving mountains, in carving stones, in carving rocks, and all of that. And certainly the ayah was letting us know that the punishment was aiming at what they mostly had that pride in. So it was targeting what they were really proud of, and that's why that rajfa, it was just a shake, and that shake was enough to dismantle everything that they were very proud of. Now, the other thing is that some scholars do say that rajfa is not necessarily some kind of an earthquake, and considered that rajfa, it just means that their hearts trembled from the disaster itself. So this isn't talking about a rajfa to mean an earthquake, but this is talking about the implications of the natural disaster that came to them as a punishment, the implication in the result was their own hearts going into some trembling, going into the shaking. They were shaken by that punishment, and that basically resulted in perhaps maybe something like a heart attack, or probably that they were in complete fear, that their hearts were shaken, or was it that they went themselves into a shake that affected, who knows what affected in their body. The other ayah, أخذ الذين ظلموا الصيحة. Is a sayha? The word sayha actually means it's a loud scream, or sayha could also mean a loud blasting sound. So if we're talking about a loud blasting sound, is that the implication of whatever natural disaster that was, or was the sayha itself like the thunder? Just as the thunder. The thunder itself is the sound of lightning, but the lightning itself can actually cause the high voltage to probably maybe burn the place, to probably shake it with it. Well, the sound would be the thunder would be the one to shake the place with the sound. But are we looking at a combination of both? Are we looking at a combination of rajfa, a shake that also brought in a sayha, something like a thunder, or was that sayha as a result of, let's say, an earthquake that led to the demolishing of their homes, probably make this sayha, or make these blasting sounds? So what really was it? So at the end of the day, is that when we look at the punishment, we have to understand that sometimes this onomatopoeia, like a sayha, can be the result, or is it in itself the punishment itself? Is sayha to mean something like a very loud sound that came out, or perhaps maybe the thunder, or maybe the another type of a punishment that was looking like a natural disaster affected them, or what exactly was it? We don't know for sure, but we just see from these ayat that there was more of a shake that brought in a very blasting sound, and that certainly was a manifestation and a manifestation of the punishment. So then we would understand that the combination of all that punishment, whether we're speaking about what actually happened from that punishment, or whether we're speaking about the aftermath, or whether we're speaking about during the punishment and what the situation was looking like. So فأصبحوا في دارهم, or في ديارهم in another ayah. So if you're looking at darihim, or you're looking at diyarihim, really the meaning is the same. If we're talking about darihim, we're talking about their own homes. And the word dar can sometimes not necessarily necessarily refer to a house per se, but can sometimes refer to a place of residence. So we're speaking about perhaps maybe the neighborhood, or we're speaking about the city, or we're probably talking about maybe even a country that was living this lifestyle. So we're speaking about an area that is within the perimeter of their authority, or is within the perimeter of their of what would be considered as their place of residence. And we talked about the word jathimin, and jathimin, whether we're speaking about that, that they were as a result of that blasting sound, or as a result of probably the shake, or result of that natural disaster. And certainly, let me just comment on the word natural disaster. If you were to say natural disaster, that is, it can give us two meanings. It can mean that nature itself is doing the disaster. In other words, it's just a disaster that we can see as a disaster, but it's just something that nature on its own does the work, and it's just matter in motion that does the work. If somebody means by natural disaster that's kufr on the spot. That is kufr on the spot, to believe that nature itself controls itself, that is basically matter in motion, that is kufr. Nature does not move on its own. Nature is basically controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to think that this is a natural disaster, meaning it controls itself, or to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in the power or the force or the energy in the molecules and the atoms, or in different things, in living things, and that it basically just controls itself and it moves all along by itself, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not working and putting in all this control within it, that's kufr. But to believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created, whether we're speaking about living things, or whether we're speaking about atoms, or whether we're speaking about everything in nature, and we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that basically controls all the forces, and that matter in itself does not function on its own, but it functions by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why we say Bismillah, even when you probably were the one that decided to lift your hand up. You just think to lift your hand up, and it lifts. You don't necessarily tell it to lift. You don't necessarily use your other hand to lift the first hand, etc., unless you had a stroke. That's a different story. Okay, but you would give the signal, and the brain would basically control the movement of your hand. But as a Muslim, you would see that it was Bismillah, by the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that gave you the power and that gave you the ability to basically lift your hand up, to basically function all the different things in your body, or function the world around you. So therefore, there's no such thing as matter in motion, but there is the matter that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls and instilled its motion, its function, it's the law that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. So when we're looking at the universe, we're seeing matter created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're also seeing that lahu maqalidu samawati wal ard, that he controls al-maqalid. When you say maqalid, we're speaking about energy, we're speaking about force, we're speaking about power. All of that is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and things do not function on their own, but they function as based on the perimeter, or based on the paradigm, or based on the order, or based on the design that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. So therefore, when we look at خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, and we look at لَهُ مَقَالِيدُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, we're talking about two different things, and we're also talking about that matter itself was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the function of it was designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it does not go outside of the design and outside of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's see. فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ is basically where we left off at. So here, what does فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ actually mean? So here's Prophet Salih alayhi salam. He was giving them, that is basically the people of Thamud, giving them that da'wah. And certainly, you had a group of people that did believe, and certainly we talked about قال الملأ الذين استكبروا من قومه للذين استضعفوا. Certainly, the people that were considered the elite, the people that were considered in power, the people that were considered as the arrogant ones that rejected da'wah, they were the ones that they were the ones that were persecuting the people that were considered as more vulnerable. They were persecuting the ones that were considered weaker, perhaps financially, perhaps social status was different, perhaps maybe their power, their who knows all the different details of why these lower class, or what is considered as lower class within that society, they were accepting dawah. And there's one thing that we always say is that those that are considered the bullies, those that are considered the arrogant ones, are a lot harder to accept dawah. Their hearts hardened. Their hearts hardened because they got carried away with the different privileges. The entitlement that they were living in basically made them think that they had the secret to owning their life, and therefore they did not owe anything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Versus الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا, usually the weaker society, usually the poor society, the people that don't necessarily live, let's call it with a silver spoon in their mouth, or don't necessarily live in this upper class type of arrogance, or don't live in that entitlement. They are the ones usually to accept da'wah. The poor people are usually the fastest to accept da'wah. Usually the people that are not in the upper social status level, usually the ones that are in the lower social status level are usually the ones to be humble, the ones to accept the da'wah, the ones to also recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that they need to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and which is very important. Even the Prophet ﷺ used to make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would resurrect him and gather him on Judgment Day with Zumratil Masakin, that he would be along with the group of al-Masakin. Why? What is al-Miskin? Al-Miskin, does that mean as a needy person? No, it's not necessarily the needy person, but the person that is, you're either a miskin, a faqir, or a ghani. Al-ghani would be the person that is not in need of people. They basically have it all. You need to go to the doctor, you just pay for the money and you just go. But a person that probably needs to go to the doctor, but they don't have that money to go to the doctor, that's basically a person that is faqir. Or a person that needs to buy food, but then they don't have enough money to buy food, that's a faqir. What's a miskin? Scholars disputed whether a faqir is on a lower end of their, let's call it the financial scale, or in poverty status, or whether the faqir is even lower. So they debated that one. But both to agree, at least we know that al-faqir and al-miskin, they both do not make enough living to cover their financial needs. What are the financial needs? We're talking about perhaps number one, things that they need for their health, their life, things that they need for their probably education, things that they need for maybe their family and security, and things that they probably need also to at least save on a side for those dark, rainy days, to be able to have enough money on a side for those rainy days. So we're looking at, okay, which one is miskeen? So they don't necessarily have to have this huge savings, but we're speaking about just be able to consider by the end of the month that they would have some money by the end of the month that is there to subsidize their needs. Okay, let's see. So when you're looking at فتولى عنهم, why did, we were talking about استضعفوا. قال الملأ الذين استكبروا من قومه للذين استضعفوا لمن آمن منهم أتعلمون أن صالحا مرسل من ربه. Okay, so we were looking at الذين استضعفوا as the weaker group, and certainly the persecuted group, and certainly the ones that were living in the arrogance. They were wanting to test the determination, wanting to certainly eliminate and try to take away their confidence in Prophet Salih alayhi salam. But of course, الذين استضعفوا, their determination, their commitment to Iman was very strong, and they said, إِنَّا بِمَا أُرْسِلَ بِهِ مُؤْمِنُونَ. And we talked about this response. They didn't just say, Na'am, yes, we believe in him, but they actually said, yes, in what he was sent with, in the revelation, we are believers of it. قال الذين استكبروا إنا بالذي آمنتم به كافرون. Then the arrogant ones, the disbelievers, they basically said, in what he was said, what you were believers in, we are basically disbelievers. That's what they had said. By the way, just on a side, it is actually the sunnah. Let's say you wanted to quote someone that said a word of kufr or a word of evil. Okay, you never want to say, he said quote, I'm a disbeliever. You never want to quote it this way. So what would you do? You would make it into a second person. So when you would want to quote something that dangerous, you never quote it exactly with the same wording. So what would you say? You would say, he said that he is a disbeliever. You never say I as a quote, even though that was his quotation. Why not? Even though he said I, etc. Okay, why? Because you don't want your brain to get used to this type of wording whatsoever, because when you die and when you are in the process of dying, the excruciating pain is going to be so strong that a lot of the different words that you might have said and probably did not even mean while you are in the process of dying, you could be hallucinating, or you could be aware, or you could be in extreme pain that you might be saying different things that you probably in your, let's call it in your normal thinking state of mind, you normally would not say. So you train your brain on what to say and how to relate to the world around you and how and what kind of words to say. That way, while you are dying, you would basically have already trained your brain on how to speak. And that way, the last words that you would say are words of khair. So you would never say, I am such and such, if we're speaking about something that is kufr, even if you are quoting, but you would say, he said such and such, as a he, all right, or she, or whatever it is. So here in this quotation, قال الذين استكبروا إنا بالذي آمنتم به كافرون. So in that situation, okay, let's say قال الذين استكبروا, and then somebody lost their breath. You never stop and restart at إنا بالذي آمنتم به كافرون. That would be a very fahish, or that would be a very wrong start. Because if you were to start inna billadhi amantum bihi kafirun, that's a very dangerous word to start on. So you would then restart and say قال الذين استكبروا إنا بالذي آمنتم به كافرون فعقروا الناقة وعتوا عن أمر ربهم وقالوا يا صالح ائتنا بما تعدنا إن كنت من المرسلين. So that's when they basically, I want you to look at that letter fa right there, because that's letting us know that there was an immediate action. Once they get into the state of kufr, once they get into the state of disbelief, then you're going to see the implication of it in behavior. Let's do it this way. When you see a certain idea, a certain wording that somebody might say, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in al-khabithuna lil-khabithat, الطيبون للطيبات. And scholars actually explained, some scholars actually explained this. This isn't talking about good men are for good women and good women are good for good men. No, but الطيبون للطيبات and الخبيثون للخبيثات, meaning good behaviors are a result of the good heart. So if you look at what a person thinks, that's going to be letting you know that the behavior is going to result as to in congruence and go in parallel with what this person thinks. Same thing. If a person exits and if a person ejects words of, let's say, fahish words or inappropriate words, that means they have a dirty mind and a dirty heart. And same thing, if a person always says good words, that means their heart is always relating to good things. So in other words, your words and what they're expressing is really, just consider it as the front side of what's inside that envelope, which is your brain. It's exactly like that. Think of it as this mailing address. Right there, you want to know what's inside this envelope. Well, you just look at the mailing address, who's sending this to me and who's it coming from. And that way you would basically know what's inside that letter. And certainly if it's going to be from perhaps maybe the electric company, well, they're not going to send you a love note. They're going to send you a bill. Right? If it's coming from your bank, it's going to be a statement. If it's going to be coming from your landlord, it's probably most likely either an eviction notice if you didn't pay your bill or you didn't pay your rent, or it's probably going to be maybe something to tell you that you've got an amount due that is this much. And certainly if it's coming from your parent or a loved one, then you would expect it's going to be a nice letter. And the same thing if you're looking at the words themselves. What's inside your heart is going to determine what type of words you would basically say. Okay, let's see. فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ فَأَصْبَحُوا فِي دَارِهِمْ جَاثِمِينَ. And certainly Rajfa had taken them. When you look at, since they did فَعَقَرُوا, since they went and right away, as a result of their kufr that was inside their brain, the action that affected, or I should say that the idea that affected their action was kufr, and the action that basically resulted was aqarun naqa. They basically went and amputated the legs and amputated that she camel, and wa'ataw an amri rabbihim. So basically, here's a question: wa'ataw an amri rabbihim, was that as a result of aqarun naqa? So they basically had amputated the she-camel, and was that by amputating the she-camel, was that what led to this description as ataw an amri rabbihim, or is it a combination of both? That they did two things. Number one is that in terms of amanu, well, they displayed kufr. And in terms of amal salihat, well, they displayed going in rejection with the order of what Prophet Salih had told them to do. So they did the total opposite of amanu wa amal salihat. They did kafaru, and they definitely did not do what is right. And as a result, That would be the description as عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ. Okay? So think of it this way. If a person is basically having disbelief and their actions are showing and displaying basically illicit action or probably bullying or oppression or going against the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in itself is a form of al-utu. It's a form of going beyond the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's a form of oppression. It's a form of transgressing the limits. So when you say what is transgressing, what is it? What does it mean to say somebody transgressed the limit? We're talking about two limits. A limit of what is in their brain, basically in their heart and in their brain. Okay. And the second part, which is al-amal, what action did they display? What action did they go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or did they embrace the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So we're looking at amanu wa amilu salihat, and it's not enough to just do amal salih. It's not enough to do just good actions, but you have to have al-iman with it, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bihi, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive that somebody would associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Versus it can happen that a person might be a believer, but their behavior is not always in the right direction in going in accordance with the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so فأخذتهم الرجفة. So since they basically displayed that العتو, going in transgression against the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to look at this one. عتوا عن أمر ربهم. I want to look at this one. عن أمر ربهم. What is al-amr? Al-amr means the order. Al-amr can also mean the sequence of something, or let's call it we're speaking about the paradigm of something. Al-amr can be an order. Al-amr can be a sequence of something, or the design of something, or the order of something. Or it could also mean the paradigm of something. And عن أمر ربهم could also refer to basically the instruction that they were given, which is not to touch and not to harm the she-camel. That was the instruction that they were given, which is right here, وَلَا تَمَسُّوهَا بِسُوءٍ, and do not harm it. But they went against the order of their Lord Almighty, and they also went against the instruction of their Lord Almighty, and also went against the order, or let's call it the instruction, or let's call it that sequence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered them to embrace. So in that situation, when we're speaking about amr rabbihim, even in terms of your Islam, there's an instruction in life, and there's also an information in life. Information to inform you about Allah, to inform you about what you were created for, to inform you about the akhirah. There's that piece of information, and there's the other piece of direction. So when you look at al-hidayah is two sides. There's hidayat al-tawfiq, and there's hidayat al-irshad. Al-hidayat al-irshad is basically giving you the information, helping you recognize who are you, where you're heading in terms of akhirah, and then certainly that is to give you the information of what you need to apply in life. In other words, what you'll be held accountable for. That's the hidayat al-irshad. Hidayat al-tawfiq is you putting that into application. So that's when you say an amri rabbik, you're talking about two things. You're talking about the instruction that they basically had known, and you're also talking about the application that they were asked to apply in terms of the action to keep وَلَا تَمَسُّوهَا بِسُوءٍ, to keep this she-camel away from all types of harm. So that's when, certainly, well, when you say عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ, there can be another explanation here, which is عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ in terms of what? In terms of قَالُوا يَا صَالِحُ ائتنا بما تعدنا إن كنت من المرسلين. So it can be another description that عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ is not necessarily in terms of that they were kuffar and that they عقروا الناقة, but عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ. Now what does that look like? That قالوا يا صالح ائتنا بما تعدنا إن كنت من المرسلين. Did everybody understand what I'm saying? So if we were to say عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ, is this describing these two sets of actions, الكفر and عقروا الناقة, or is عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ in this quote قالوا يا صالح ائتنا بما تعدنا إن كنت من المرسلين, meaning that they said, O Salih, bring us what you had threatened us with, which is that they will get the consequences for going against the instructions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the consequence, they were not yet told about it, but they were told that there's going to be a consequence. What does that consequence look like? When is it going to be? They were not yet told about it, but they were told that there's going to be a consequence. Okay, now that's the second opinion, is that here, عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ, is that it basically is talking about when they had said, challenging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and challenging Prophet Salih, bring us the destruction that you were foretelling us about or threatening us with. The third opinion said, no, عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ includes both. Includes that عَقَرُوا النَّاقَةَ, and it includes that قَالُوا يَا صَالِحُ ائْتُنَا بِمَا تَعِدُنَا إِن كُنتَ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, because of the letter wa. He said, well, the letter wa is letting us know. عَتَوْا عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِمْ, and the letter wa is letting us know that in addition to what they had committed in displaying kufr and displaying going against the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in action, and including on top of that, they also said, O Salih, challenging Prophet Salih alayhi salam with bringing in the destruction since they didn't believe it. Okay, let's see. So that's when فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ. Of course, when you look at the letter fa, that is to let us know that this was something that came in as an instant, came in. We don't mean instant to mean right away when they said that, but as an instant in terms of, let's call it the chronology of how fast and based on history. So what do you mean by based on history? When we speak about time, you doing something and right away, probably proceeding right after that, you probably choked and you drank water. Right away, here's the letter fa, right away, came right on time. But when you probably go to school, you probably take 4 years to finish your undergrad, okay? And then after you finish your undergrad, then you probably maybe a semester later, you decide to go for graduate school, okay? Can that be the letter fa? The answer is yes, because anyways, undergrad takes 4 years and just waiting a semester is not that long compared to somebody waiting probably 10 years to decide to go to grad school. Okay, so when you look at the time lapse that in history that things may that the way that you would judge something in history differs from whatever that action and what that usual time lapse is. So we're looking at the age of let's say a country. We're looking at the age of a country in how goes up in prosperity and probably then falls. It probably will take 200 years in how fast it would go up. You look at the Greek civilization, or you probably might look at uh, you probably might look at other civilizations the same way, that how they go up and how they basically decline, it is completely different than when you look at a person in their time lapse. In other words, you live up to 75 years, maybe 80 years, etc. But certainly when you're judging a country, you don't judge it based on the human uh, the human timing. Okay, same thing if you look at here. فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ. It doesn't mean instantly, but you're judging it based on the time lapse of how long it will take usually to collapse and destruct a civilization. So could have been 3 years later, could have been 15, could have been 20, could have been 30, 50 years. Who knows how long it was according to this letter fa, if we're going to basically look at that letter fa. But when we judge countries, we judge civilizations, we judge it based on different timings in different chronology than, or in different time zones and different numberings than the way that we would judge human life, or we would judge just different things that you would basically look at the timing of it. So this letter fa, if we're speaking about in terms of civilization, it could have been 15 years, could have been 20 years. But in terms of a civilization and the speed that it basically fell in and collapsed in, it could have been way faster than a normal process of a civilization declining. Okay, so when you look at that, فَأَخَذَتْهُمُ الرَّجْفَةُ, it is letting us know that it was faster than they had anticipated, faster than they had thought would ever basically come and bring an end to their civilization. And certainly, if we were to take the word civilization, Muhammad Qutb is definitely going to hate me using the word civilization for the people of Thamud, because he regards, and what he said was true, is that civilization is to basically describe that something is being civil and something is basically giving me a connotation that they were living up to a certain civil society, a certain principle, a certain high level of accomplishment. Okay. But based on the Quran, he says, it actually lets us know that Thamud was not living a civilization, but it was actually living in counter to that, it was living a jahiliyyah. So he said that if you're looking at Fir'aun, it was called a jahiliyyah and not a civilization. The Greek, it was a jahiliyyah, not a civilization. The different empires that probably passed, they were living in jahiliyyah. How do we judge whether something is a jahiliyyah or a civilization? We judge it based on the lens of La ilaha illallah and based on the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If these people are living the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then therefore it's a civilization. If it is not living a civilization, then therefore it's modernity and not a civilization, because to be civil is to be human. To be human is to live based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basharana bihi, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically taught us on how to live human. If this person is not embracing the human principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed us, that that's what it means to live as a level of being human, a level of being civil, a level of what it means to live based on the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that person practiced modernity and not civilization. They managed to create certain maybe buildings or create certain things that they, with experiment, they learned how to make, but not necessarily as something that made them in their human sense civil. It just means that they're living in their jahiliyyah, but they managed to make modernity. And certainly that book that I read when I was in ninth grade was probably one of the most important books that I read in my life. It was called La ilaha illallah and Minhaj Sharia. It was Minhaj Sharia. It wasn't a big book. It was almost 130 pages. And maybe I can show you the book, right? Maybe I can show you the book and so it's in Arabic, but definitely that book needs to be translated. La ilaha illallah, and let me see Muhammad Qutb and Minhaj, maybe if I were to write it right there. And oh, the book is actually available in PDF. And let me show you the book, right? This is the book. This is the book right there. This is the book. And this was the copy that I had. Okay, let's see. It says Aqidah wa Sharia wa Minhaj Hayah. It's not that big, but it was one of the most important books that I had read. The copy that I had was great. This was the copy that I had. Outstanding book, definitely needs to be taught as a book of reference for learning Aqidah. If we don't learn Aqidah based on this book, then we're really confusing our definition of Aqidah and confusing our understanding of Islam. If the person is not really reading Aqidah based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taught us. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taught us is that Quran and action is our reference to help us understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants of us. Okay, فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ وَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ لَقَدْ أَبْلَغْتُكُمْ رِسَالَةَ رَبِّي وَنَصَحْتُ لَكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُحِبُّونَ النَّاصِحِينَ. فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ. Does that mean he left them? Let's give a surface translation first. فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ. The word فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ, it can mean a past tense, that he basically departed them or isolated himself from them, or it can mean that it was that it wasn't a past tense, but it was more of an imperative verb, meaning to let us know that he was ordered and given an instruction to separate from them and to basically depart them. Two different things. So فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ, it could also give us an instruction that there's a certain time when you know that you had done your duty in giving da'wah to a group of people, then there's going to be a certain time where you have to determine that it was about time to leave these people. It was about time to leave these people, to isolate yourself from them. It was about time to separate yourself from them. And it could also mean that he was instructed, if we were to read this as an imperative verb, that he was instructed that it is time for you to leave. It is a time for you to isolate yourself from them. It is time for you to separate yourself from them. There's going to be a different, let's say, stance and a different consequence that's probably going to be coming up. But then he said, وَقَالَ. What do we understand with this letter wa? So, فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ, if we are to understand it as an imperative verb, that means he was given that instruction to, it's time for you to leave. They're not accepting that da'wah, time for you to completely separate yourself from them. So that would be وَقَالَ يَا قَوْمِ. That's when he still had his heart connected to them. And he would say, oh my people. He said, oh my people, I had given you the information about my Lord Almighty's message, and I had given you the advice, but you do not love those that would give you the advice. Okay, if we were to understand this as that was an instruction. Okay, now he had that instruction to separate, and this is what he done, what he had said basically, and what he had done. Okay, if we are to understand this as a past tense verb, then in that situation, فَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ, then he had recognized that here with this letter wa would let us know that there was a lisanul hal and a lisanul maqam. Lisanul hal, meaning that his situation and what describes that his status or his situation, and his comment on this was, but he was telling them, there's that past tense telling us that he separated himself from them, and his status, his situation was speaking of itself, not necessarily literally him saying these words, but the situation was speaking of itself. And he would say, that is, the situation would speak of itself and say, "Oh, my people, I had delivered the message upon you, the message of the Lord Almighty, that is, and I had advised you, but you do not love those that would give you advice." Okay, that would basically mean give us a somewhat of a lisanul hal. Can it also be lisanul maqal, meaning that he literally said that he separated himself from them, and they were probably asking, "Well, why did you go?" And he said, "Well, I had done my duty. I had given you the advice, but you don't want anyone to give you advice. I'm done." So it could be lisan al-hal and lisan al-maqam. Okay, now, and lisan al-maqal, not lisan al-maqam. Okay, let's see right there. So if we were to say fatawalla anhum, the question is, what does the word tawalla actually mean? And a very beautiful article that I actually found on this website, this one. Very good article. And remember, you could actually translate this. You can go right there, these little 3 dots right there, and you can actually translate it. And here we go. Okay, but I'm not going to use the translated one. I'm going to get to the original, and I'll be translating for you basically what is here, because I want you to see these ayat right there, and I'll be translating it for you orally. Okay, so what I like about this article is that it's actually giving me the different meanings between al-i'rad and al-tawalli. What's the difference between when you say a'rada and tawalla? Why did this ayah actually say fa'arid anhum or fatawalla anhum, and in other ayat it was saying fa'arid anhum? So not necessarily with this story, but with other prophets, it was saying a'rid anhum. With the Prophet ﷺ, a'rid anhum. What's the difference between al-i'rad and al-tawalli? When do I do i'rad and when do I do tawalli is the question. But in order to understand when I do either i'rad or tawalli, there are certain times, well, yes, this person, there's no hope in changing that person. And now you have to take a different stance, which is separating yourself from these people. Or probably, if it's a husband, time for you to leave this marriage. If it's probably a group, maybe a family, maybe it's time for you to just be there at certain occasions, but most of the times you're probably not there any longer. Or maybe these group of people that's it. You never want to communicate with them whatsoever. It's called a block in our modern times. When do I do this or that? And what does that even look like? So first we have to scrutinize these words and actually see what they mean first. Raghib al-Asfahani, let's say, he said, when you're looking at tawalla, you're actually talking about the person himself, that is, you're looking at the person that, the nearest things, or we're looking at people's what makes that connection between you and them. It's probably your hearing, or probably your seeing, or probably your face. So when you say tawalla, you're not listening anymore, you're not looking at them anymore, and you're probably also looking at a different direction. That's tawalla. In other words, you're not giving them this attention anymore, not visual attention. Not, of course, you're not looking at them, they're not giving them eye contact, you're probably not even listening to them, you're probably not in that area where your face is even looking at them, but you're turning your face away. You're probably within the same area, but you're not giving them that attention. You're not giving them any form of communication. Not visual communication, not you're not listening to their communication, not listening to their type of talk and their drama and all of that. And you're not even, when you're looking at a face, I want you to look at this one. When you say وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض, I face my face to the one that created the heavens and the earth, etc. What is the face? Why speak about the face? In Lugha Arabiya, this is called badal. What is badal? It means you're talking about one specific thing, but what you mean by that is something a lot more. So why speak about the face? Because the face is actually showing your identity, what you look at, what you listen to, what you talk about. The behind part of yours is really nothing but a blank sheet of paper, a blank sheet of body. Right, the back, if you were to compare your behind your head, it's just blank. There's only some hair, but it's blank. If you were to look at the front part of you, basically contains all the different things that matter. Your face, your nose, your mouth, all of that. That's basically the area that contains the most important thing that makes you who you are. What you listen to, what you hear, what you say, and all of that. If you look at your back, it's completely different than the front part of your body. So the back part of your body, that's basically that area that is blank. So in other words, if a person is doing i'rad, they're basically going to give them a blank relationship. It's nothing. It is nothing. But if you give this person your face, that means you're communicating with them, you're talking to them, you are doing eye contact, you're basically, let's call it wholeheartedly towards them, you are communicating with them, you are living in this exchange of communication. But if you give them your back, that's al-i'rad, means it's blank. There's no way for me to relate to you in communication whatsoever. So when you say i'rad, you're turning your back. No communication. If you're talking about it tawalli, you're more turning your focus. Whether we're speaking about focus in hearing or whether focus in eye contact or your focus in face. Okay, so al-i'rad would actually be something perhaps even, let's call it a bigger hyperbole. We're talking about a bigger distancing. Let's see right there. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا. Why didn't he say, فَلَنُعْطِيَنَّكَ? Why فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ? Meaning that it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising that the Prophet ﷺ will be given a qibla. What is a qibla? It's a place of focus. It's a place of direction. So when you say لَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ, where your your hearing, your vision is basically directed at that qibla. You're basically communicating and you're considering it as your center. Let's see right there. If when it says فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ بِالْمُفْسِدِينَ, and then in certain situations, it can actually mean the same thing. That التولي and الإعراض can sometimes be more of a synonym and can have very similar meanings depending on the context. Let's see right here. التولي can be with the person physically going away. In other words, person is not listening, person is saying, hey, I'm not going to follow orders. I'm basically mute in listening to you and relating to you, so therefore giving them the back. Okay, let's see here. Abu al-Baqa al-Kafawi, a very important scholar who actually taught he was a qadi, and Abu al-Baqa al-Kafawi was a Hanafi scholar. He taught in Turkey, he taught in Palestine, and taught in Baghdad. And he had a book, it's called Al-Kulliyat, I'll show it to you some other time, inshallah. And anyhow, let's see what is the book Al-Kulliyat and why did I even mention it? Let me see right there. Let's look at this book for Al-Kulliyat really quick. This is his book. And what is the book about? Al-Kulliyat, it's a book that actually takes us into, let's look at it. الكليات actually معجم في المصطلحات and الفروق اللغوية. So it's basically like a thesaurus type of thing. What it does is that it takes you into the words that are very similar, but it goes in details and tells you the differences in these definitions and how they are different, and certainly goes in details with a lot of those words that may contain a lot of definitions. So they'll basically get into those details. Okay, let's see, what did he want to say about الإعراض and التولي and the difference. Okay, he said الإعراض أن تولي الشيء عرضك أي جانبك ولا تقبل عليه. Fair enough. What did he say? He said, well, what it means to do i'rad, it's to basically give the person or whatever that thing is, urdak meaning that you're giving them your back and you're giving them your side and you're not approaching them directly. Versus التولي is to completely separate yourself and to completely turn away. And therefore, according to Abu al-Baqa al-Kafawi, al-i'rad actually means to depart yourself wholeheartedly, versus al-mutawalli, a person that is doing tawalli, they're basically separating themselves in behavior, and certainly it is if the person is doing al-i'rad, according to Abu al-Baqa al-Kafawi, al-i'rad is even worse. But that's not something that all scholars would agree on. Some scholars actually considered that what is worse than which one's worse, al-i'rad or al-tawalli. Abu al-Baqa al-Kafawi considered al-i'rad is worse. Other scholars actually considered al-tawalli is worse. At the end of the day, one is you're separating yourself wholeheartedly, and the other one, you're separating yourself from this area completely. Okay. And certainly the worst part is when the person is separating themselves wholeheartedly. In other words, they're not giving them their attention, and also physically. Okay, let's see. Al-i'rad actually appeared in the Quran in more than 50 different areas. 50 different ayat. Let's see. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ ذُكِّرَ بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِ ثُمَّ أَعْرَضَ عَنْهَا. Let's see, the ayah says, and there's no farther transgression than the person that was reminded of their Lord Almighty's verses, yet they turn away from it. Al-Qurtubi said, أعرض عنها بترك القبول. أعرض to mean that this person abandoned accepting these verses and these instructions, basically. Ibn Kathir said, well, أعرض عنها actually means that this person had forgotten it, and this person abandoned it, and therefore did not listen to it and did not give it attention. That's basically what Ibn Kathir described أعرض عنها. So what are we trying to get to here? We're trying to get to what it means to have al-i'rad. Is it just to not give attention, not to give focus? And you can see Al-Qurtubi and Ibn Kathir wanted to say that that's basically what it means. Shawkani actually said that it's basically both, that the person basically they were reminded of those ayat, and they were basically given all the instructions, but this person had been, the word is tahawana biha. What is it, tahawan? Tahawan is to be dismissing these ayat basically, and not not take it seriously. And this person basically had abandoned it, did not accept it, and certainly did not look into these ayah, did not scrutinize these ayah, did not think of them, and did not even give it the right level and the right amount of attention and consideration. الشنقيطي, let's see what he says. الشنقيطي is a modern scholar. الشنقيطي, a very important modern scholar. الشنقيطي had a book. It's almost in 12 volumes. It's called أضواء البيان. Maybe I can show you that book. أضواء البيان, it was written, one thing, just to give you an idea about Shanqit. Shanqit is a city in Mauritania. Okay, this city in Mauritania, it basically still lives like the past. What do I mean like the past? There's no electricity, no water flowing. It's so far away from civilization. And people still, even during our times today, they actually go to Shanqit to seek ilm just like the old days. So they would go and memorize the Quran and memorize the mutun and memorize and learn Lugha Arabiya. And these people learn poetry and speak poetry just from the first time the poem is read. These people are able to memorize it. These people speak poetry like they are drinking water. These are probably These are probably the most scholarly groups of people that we know of. This is his book. It's called أضواء البيان في إيضاح القرآن. Okay, you could see this copy is 7 volumes. The copy that we had was, let's see, this one is 10 volumes. So you had different volumes. This is the copy that we had, was in almost 12 volumes. Anyhow, and what this book does, it's a different type of tafsir. What he does, he goes to the different ayat and he basically goes into these very intricate meanings of the different words in the ayat, and he'll compare the words and compare the meanings, and very scholarly. And he actually died in, let's say, around 1979, around that time. Don't have the exact uh, I don't have the exact timing, but within that area. Okay, let's see. What did he say? He said, الشنقيطي said, فأعرض عنها أي تولى وصد عنها. He said, it basically means that the person had, well, basically he said, تولى عنها. He had considered that أعرض عنها basically gives pretty much the same meaning as tawalla. In other words, this person had turned away. Let's see here. اقترب للناس حسابهم وهم في غفلة معرضون. That people are near their accountability, but they are pacified away. And what is معرضون? معرضون, Abu Hayyan. Abu Hayyan was a great scholar of Lugha Arabiya right there. He was more specialized in Lugha Arabiya and wrote a book. It's called إعراب القرآن. It's a huge book. Anyhow, it's almost 20 volumes. Okay, let's see. He said, الغفلة عن الشيء. If we were to say that these people were mu'ridun, that is, he wanted to look into these two words. He said, if somebody is mu'rid and the word ghafla, it actually lets us know that they were pacified away from something, and certainly that they were basically dismissing everything, and they did not give it the attention that it was supposed to be, that it was supposed to be given, which is al-akhirah. So if we are to say that they were in ghafla, but they were mu'rid, how is it that they're in ghafla, yet they're mu'rid? So they basically did not give it attention. They were basically in getting pacified with other things. So what does that mean? It basically means their priorities was not the akhirah, but their priority was their dunya. So what does it mean that a person is mu'rad? Al-mu'rad here would mean that their priorities were confused. They confused their priorities. They considered that their priority was dunya. So they basically went away from akhirah. They pacified themselves. How do they pacify themselves? By getting engaged and busy with something else. Did they recognize that there was akhirah? They probably recognized that there was going to be death, which is inevitable, but they did not work towards it. They didn't even think about it. They were just living their life as if that was it, and considered that all of this creation was created in absurdity. So what did they do? They didn't even care about the akhirah. So they turned away from al-akhirah, and they didn't even recognize that their accountability and the akhirah was near. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's say, says, مَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَحْمِلُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وِزْرًا. Whoever departs away from what? Whether we're talking about dhikr, أعرض عنه, or what is in it, Quran, and reminding them of the hereafter and the details of it. And then therefore, what does that mean? Well, the implication, if we were to put a semicolon right there, فَإِنَّهُ يَحْمِلُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وِزْرًا, then they would be carrying on Judgment Day nothing but loads of wizra. What is al-wizr? Al-wizr is sin. Let's see. And al-Baghawi here explained it. He said, "Man a'rada anhu," meaning whoever turns away from the Quran and does not believe in it and does not put it into practice. And that's the same thing if we're talking about بل أكثرهم لا يعلمون الحق فهم معرضون. But most of them do not know the truth, and therefore, that is semicolon right there, they would be mu'radun. So what does that mu'rad in this situation mean? Mu'rad meaning that because they lacked ilm, they lacked the knowledge, they did not embrace hidayat al-irshad, the guidance of information that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent them, then therefore they lost their ability to distinguish between right and wrong. They lost their ability to recognize truth. And therefore they turned away from it because they didn't even recognize it. And that's why Ibn Atiyah, he basically said al-i'rad does not necessarily mean that the person is turning away from something just to turn away, but sometimes it could also mean that they're not spending the time to learn it. They're not taking and putting and investing time to recognize it, to learn the details of it. Therefore, they would not know the truth. So not knowing the truth may mean that they did not put in the effort to learn it. They did not put the effort to recognize it. They did not put in the effort to, one, create this communication verbally, create this communication visually, create this communication to listen to it. So while you're listening to this dars, you are not mu'rad because you are, even though you cannot say me, but you're listening. You are communicating with your listening audio and listening to it. That's not i'rad. That's a form of communication. That's a form of communication. If a person decided not to listen to ilm, not to go to the masjid, not to probably engage with the salihin, not probably take the time to read the Quran, then this person is mu'rad. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُعْرِضْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ رَبِّهِ يَسْلُكْهُ عَذَابًا صَعَدًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever goes away and turns away, and this is very important to look at all those meanings of i'rad, because if we were to go to the translation, we're going to see that al-i'rad, when they would translate it, they would just use the word turn away. But we need to go deeper in the meaning in order to understand what is al-i'rad. What does it look like? How is that manifested into? How does it look like? So here al-Qurtubi said, well, if you were to say, وَمَن يُعْرِضْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ رَبِّهِ, what does it mean that the person is turning away from the remembrance of their Lord, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, the result is going to be يَسْلُكْهُ عَذَابًا صَعَدًا, that they will basically be guided to what will be leading to a trajectory of عذابًا صعدا, meaning an increased type of a torment. So when you look at that يسلكه, so in other words, there are two paths. There's either the path of dhikr, either the path of remembrance and recognizing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, or this person is going to find themselves in a trajectory that's leading them somewhere else. So that's why when you look at Quran, here Al-Qurtubi said, well, this is actually speaking about Al-Quran, and therefore al-i'rad has two meanings. Number one, which is basically if the person is doing qabul, remember we're speaking about al-i'rad is two things. There's one, since we believe that there's hidayat al-irshad and hidayat al-tawfiq. If the person is not following hidayat al-irshad, then they're choosing not to accept it. Hidayat al-irshad meaning the guidance in the information, recognizing and knowing the information, knowing the details. And then there's the other one, which is hidayat al-tawfiq, which is the action. So when you say أعرض عن ذكر ربه, whether we're speaking about the dhikr as an oral dhikr, meaning you recognize it and embrace it, and whether we're speaking about behavioral dhikr in putting it into action, and that would be for al-mu'mineen. So when you look at وَمَا يُعْرِضْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ رَبِّهِ, we're speaking about what type of dhikr are they going to be if they're not embracing the dhikr of hidayat al-irshad and hidayat al-tawfiq. What is the trajectory? Well, the trajectory is that without them realizing, certainly this ayah is just giving you the very end trajectory, which is that they would be finding themselves in a torment, in a punishment, which would be increasing and not decreasing. But what it also wanted to say, of course, right there, the inference is that, well, if they're away from hidayat al-irshad and hidayat al-tawfiq, the action is going to be away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is going to lead them to this trajectory. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know, ثُمَّ تَوَلَّيْتُمْ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ, basically talking about, speaking about the munafiqeen. ثُمَّ تَوَلَّيْتُمْ, what, I want to look at this one. If you're talking about تَوَلَّيْتُم and you're talking about مُعْرِضُون, this is one of the rarest ayat that it's actually giving me both the tawalli and the i'rad in the same ayah. When you say تَوَلَّيْتُمْ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ, now it's letting me know that this isn't a repetitive word, but there's some slight difference. Okay, the slight difference. So one is that تَوَلَّيْتُم, meaning that you went away from the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْكُمْ, very few had actually chosen to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore those that had chosen to depart completely, meaning not put it into practice, not listen to Hidayat al-Irshad or Hidayat al-Tawfiq, those would be the ones to actually be included in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment. Let's see, right there. And that's why Ibn Abbas had explained this, and he said that means you left it entirely. So tawallaytum, that is the first stance, chosen to not listen, chosen to not even be around the Salihin. Because remember, even being around the Salihin, you may not be capable of hearing everything and understanding everything that they're saying. You're listening to the dars, and I'm very sure that some of you might not be, you're trying to be tentative, but might not be in full understanding of what was being said. You probably might understand 40%, but not 100%. And yet you're still listening. You're still listening, even though you probably managed to understand 40% of it, whether because you're busy with something or whether because I'm putting in a lot of what, what you might see as jargon and maybe a lot of definitions. And then you might still put the effort, you put the effort to say, I'm still going to be patient and listen, and hopefully one day I'll be able to comprehend this whole entire thing. Now, that's one thing, is that when you're looking at putting in that effort with the Salihin, okay, even if you may not fully understand everything, but you're putting in this effort to be around the Salihin because you want to be a part of them, to not do that التولي. So what do? You give this listening ear, you look at what they're doing, you accompany these Salihin to help you basically embrace al-Iman, to help you embrace Salah. Even though you may not necessarily be at their level, but you put in the effort to grow in your ability to be around the Salihin. Okay, let's see. ثم توليتم من بعد ذلك فلولا فضل الله ثم توليتم من بعد ذلك فلولا فضل الله عليكم ورحمته لكنتم من الخاسرين. What is that telling us here right there? All right. ثم توليتم من بعد ذلك. Then after that, you basically turned away. But if it wasn't for the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His mercy, you would have been amongst the losers. So what does that mean? If a person is not doing tawalli, then congratulations. That was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you as fadl, as a blessing. And congratulations, number 2, is that it was from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Congratulations, inshallah, you will not be amongst those that will be in loss. Inshallah, you will not be amongst those that will be in loss. You will be amongst those that are al-faizin. So if a person is not doing tawalli, congratulations. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had included you in the blessings, included you in the rahmah, and inshallah you will be included to be amongst al-faizin. Okay, let's see. So Ibn Jarir explained, ثُمَّ تَوَلَّيْتُمْ. He said that would actually mean that the person went away. Went away meaning that they turned their back away. They turned basically all submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see. What does that look like in terms of tawalli right there for al-mu'mineen? وكيف يحكمونك وعندهم التوراة فيها حكم الله ثم يتولون من بعد ذلك وما أولئك بالمؤمنين. So what does that mean? And how do they give you, that is, يحكمونك, they would basically make you be the judge. When they would have it Torah, when it has the orders and the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they turn away after that. Those are not the believers. Ibn Jarir basically explained that, and he said that actually means that they would leave the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though they knew what the order and what the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually saying. So what is that supposed to give me the inference to? The inference would be if a person leaves the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the definition of ethics that was defined based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as defined in the Quran and Sunnah, that would actually mean this is i'rad. So if you know that you get into a dispute with a friend, and then you go to maybe a faqih, and this faqih would tell you, well, the order or the fatwa in this matter is that you have to give this iPhone back to this person. Let's say disputing about an iPhone. You have to pay this much. You have to give this much. And even though you are 100% sure that that judgment was wrong, you're 100% sure. But this scholar or this imam, he basically ruled against your favor and in somebody else's interest. Even though you know that this qadi was wrong, you still have to submit to that order. But I'm very sure that this qadi is so wrong. You still have to submit to it. Khalas. Because at the end is that you had accepted that this qadi or this alim would be the one to judge. All right? This would be the alim that would judge in this situation. So in that situation, what do? It's basically going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to basically judge in this. All right. So I know, we've got some, I just want to finish this piece of it. I'll just make the story short, okay? Let's see. So we'll end it right there. What is it tawalli? It tawalli basically means then in that situation is to go against an order and to go against the judgment in the details of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically judged. And that's why for a mu'min, قُلْ أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ فَإِن تَوَلَّوْا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْكَافِرِينَ. Obey Allah and His Messenger, and if they go against that obedience, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لا يحب الكافرين. What does that mean? If a person practices التولي, that means they did not obey Allah and His Messenger. So therefore, that would actually mean this person is a kafir. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described فَلَا صَدَّقَ وَلَا صَلَّى وَلَكِنْ كَذَّبَ وَتَوَلَّى. These people would be considered that one, in faith or in faith, they did not believe and they did not put that faith into practice, but instead, that means in regards to faith, they denied, and in regards to practice, they basically turned away. So meaning, we keep that one in mind. There's Hidayat al-Tawfiq and Hidayat al-Irshad. So keep that one in mind to help us understand what this looks like. Okay, to make the story short, and let's see, if we're talking about i'rad or tawalli, we're talking about one person is not listening to the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, probably not giving it the attention, not taking the time to learn it, not accepting it, or perhaps maybe refusing to apply it, refusing to put it into action, and therefore not accepting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent in terms of ilm. And therefore, if you're talking about التولي is refusing to know, refusing to embrace wholeheartedly, refusing to listen, refusing to embrace things and being basically dismissive about it. And in terms of al-i'rad, that would mean not put it into action, and therefore it would be a further level of a person leaving it wholeheartedly and leaving the practice of it. And therefore, if we're speaking about the action of the heart, we're speaking about the person not accepting it and not embracing it wholeheartedly. If we're talking about the action, meaning staying away from applying it and submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so this is basically just, I would say, this is really short, okay? This is a really short explanation for the difference of i'rad and tawalli. So we'll end it right here, inshallah. We still didn't get farther than that because I promised time and I was committed to time, right? And this is it. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to listen to it, inshallah. No questions.